Hello.
Hi, Sophie. How are you?
Hi. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, lovely to meet you too. And how are you today? You must be so excited to be able to get out there and talk about this film, what with everything that's going on in Hollywood at the moment.
Yeah, it's intense, but I think they'll solve it soon. I have a good feeling.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed. Well, I'm glad, obviously, this weekend people will get to see your film. And of course, I'm not sure if you're aware, but Sony over in the States has just delayed Gran Turismo. So your movie is coming out pretty much on its own this weekend. So that must be quite exciting.
Really?
Yeah, it's going to be a
That's
bit
gonna be
late.
the only movie to see. It's funny because we had this conversation. I was trying to convince the distributor to push the release to after the strike, but apparently maybe they did a good calculation.
Oh well, that's well, fingers crossed. And I loved this film. I had such a good time with it. It's so interesting, that nature versus science debate that's really at the heart of it, and in the relationship with Rachel and Alvy. So I was curious, what about those themes really interested you when it came to why this was a story you wanted to tell as a filmmaker?
Uh-huh. Well, I think, I don't know if you've seen my first film. It was called Cold Souls, and it was about the commodification of the soul. And it was Paul Giamatti who could extract his soul and live without a soul. And there is a whole commotion about his soul being stolen. So I think it's maybe from living in America for the last 20 years, I feel, the theme of the commodification of everything is something that is something that I've been thinking about from just, the daily life in the US. And I think it's a place of incredible innovation and creativity, but it's also a place where capitalism is less and less enlightened. And we see it now with artificial intelligence. And I think when I started writing it 4 or 5 years ago, it felt very far-fetched and very much, far in the future, the possibility of all this technology, especially the big eye with artificial intelligence. And when it came out, it was at Sundance, it was the week that ChatGPT was launched. And suddenly it became almost a documentary. and I'm convinced they're going to invent the pod. I'm convinced it's going to happen in a few years. And it's like everything in America where things start to happen, the technology starts to happen, and then we ask the questions too late once the technology already exists. There's this whole scramble to try to regulate and understand the implication for citizens who haven't asked anything. We haven't asked for ChatGPT, for instance, and it's probably going to make, it's going, and that's why there's a strike right now in Hollywood. It's like, do we want to be replaced as screenwriters or actors, or we haven't been consulted about all this? So I think these are themes that I've been fascinated with for many years. And, you could see the influence of Brain Award probably. And I love Stanley Kubrick also. So maybe the eye is also a reference to HAL. So it's, you never know the creative process, but a lot also come from all the dreams I had when I was pregnant of my child. I had a dream journal, and all the dreams, most of the dreams I had are in the film. So it's a combination of a lot of different things.
Oh, amazing. Well, it is a really timely story. And of course, I think it's great to see a film like this with two really fantastic leads in Emilia and Chiwetel. And, they obviously come with a built-in fan base from whether it's Game of Thrones or Doctor Strange. But for you, what made them the right choice to put at the center of this story, which is obviously one that you were very passionate about telling?
Sorry, to cast Emilia and Chiwetel, or
Yeah, what was it about them that
oh,
really made them right
about
for
them?
this
Okay,
couple?
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was really lucky that, Emilia, it was just during the COVID pandemic, and it was so hard to put a film together. And Emilia happens to be at the same agency that I at CA, and her agent loved the script, and a few actresses were reading, and Emilia said she wanted to do it. She fell in love with the script, and we met through Zoom, which was frustrating. You couldn't even meet, your lead actress in person at that time. But she was extremely supportive of the film. It was really hard to put a film together at that time. And she was an executive producer, and she really pushed and was, a champion of the film. And I don't know, something clicked with her, I think. And she felt she was like the character a little bit, crushed by a world that's developing technologically a little bit too fast for our taste, and she connected with it, and then Chiwetel came later in the process, because it was really hard actually to to cast that role, the male role, because I think a lot of actors were reluctant to be goofy with a plastic egg. So it requires a healthy amount of sense of humor and self-derision, to accept this role. And I think Chiwetel has this beautiful aspect of his film career, that he could do Shakespeare, he can do slapstick comedy, he can do 12 Years a Slave, but we haven't seen him that much in comedies, and I think he definitely has that muscle. He has a very funny, he has a sense of comic timing, and he's extremely gifted as an actor, I can say. He can do anything.
Oh, amazing. And I really enjoyed, obviously, you've created this future world in the pod generation, and there are lots of little mentions scattered throughout the film of what state the world is in at this point. And I just found that really interesting. But for you, was it really challenging to create this sci-fi future that you envisioned and make that a reality on screen?
Yeah, because it looks big on screen, but it's a small film, actually.
Yeah.
It's an independent film, and the budget is very small, so we had to be very creative. Sometimes it's good, it's like in countries where you have dictatorship, you have to be more creative because you can't say everything. And here, when you want to do an ambitious sci-fi movie and you have a small budget, you also have to be very creative. And so we tried to minimize as much as possible the visual effects, and a lot where everything we could do on camera, we did on camera. And then we're very specific about, when there is a shot on this eye, and very economic about all this. And even the baby in the pod, we couldn't show it that many times. So we had to come with this system where you wave and then you can see the fetus development. But it was all storyboard and all very precise, to be economic. And we shot in Belgium, because shooting in the US was a fortune. And it's a New York story, and I live in New York, so I was sad not to shoot in the city where I live. I wanted to capture the grittiness and strangeness of New York, but that was in COVID time, it was impossible. But yeah, that's every film, I think, is just, you struggle against the elements, and it's always too expensive and requires too much time. And you work as a director is to see the fantasy, and every day realize the fantasy is shrinking, and you have to still make it work.
Oh, it's so interesting to hear that. And one of the smaller moments which I really found interesting was when it's mentioned that the pod children don't dream. And I've almost found that horrifying to hear. So as well as this being a sci-fi story, do you feel there is an element of horror, particularly with it being almost maybe a cautionary tale as well?
Oh yeah, definitely. I wanted to make it a little bit Orwellian, or where, it's two things. One is a satire of, I think, what the content culture is doing to us, and to what I see in my teenager, for instance, that this generation, and even our generation, we're so bombarded by constant content that I think, Netflix, all those companies, they're more than happy to have consumers that don't have imagination anymore, because then you need to be fed the content, so if you don't, your brain has stopped creating anything. It's the same thing with ChatGPT. If ChatGPT starts to write the essays for kids at university, they're going to start to lose this function. So I think the big question was, how much are we ready to give from ourselves for convenience? How much, as human beings, every time Google is giving you the answer for an email that you're writing, and you accept Google writing it for you, you're actually giving up a little bit of your faculties of being able to write independently and autonomously. So I feel this with technology. It's the common example is the GPS. We've collectively started to lose our sense of orientation, which was something that developed over millions of years as a species. And very quickly, in a matter of 20 years, we've given up that, and you could see some people are unable to orient themselves. Yeah. And so that's, that's like a little metaphor. And I think the egg is also a metaphor. It could be anything, but what are we ready to give? Are we ready to give our uteruses? Are we ready to give our souls? Are we ready to give all this just for the convenience? And that's what I feel, living in America is a little bit, sometimes you feel it's a society that's so in love with convenience and technology and innovation that in the process we're forgetting what we're losing as human beings. And for sure we're losing something. So I thought, okay, those children, what could they lose from not being in the womb? And I'm sure we will discover one day when science progress that some exchange, we already know there's a lot of exchange happening in the womb, and we know that when you're pregnant, some neurons migrate from the brain to the uterus, maybe for some sort of information exchange. Is there a formation of the subconscious already in the womb? Or so for sure there's something happening, like we know now from epigenetic, for instance, we know that baby elephants can find where the water is in the desert without the mother showing them, because the transmission was done. When was this transmission done? Was it done in the womb when the mother was looking for water? Was it? So we have no clue of all this. And I thought that's what happens with science and technology when you make a huge leap in the future and progress. It's impossible to measure the consequences and what you've lost in the process. And I think that was just like a metaphor of this, and just a warning, and as you say, a cautionary tale about, okay, do you want this world? But did you think of all the implications, right? Until maybe, we're forced to think about them because the technology is already there. And we've seen that with Instagram and TikTok. Like, no one has wondered before these things came out, what would be the implication on the life of teenagers.
Yeah.
And we've seen, and we're doing the same thing again with artificial intelligence. And well, this time there's for instance, for the cinema world, there's a big strike. So that's interesting that the human beings are immediately like saying, stop this, like, let's talk about this first. Let's understand the implication of this, right? But as a filmmaker, I think these are the most interesting themes, like to open up the debate. I don't have the answers, but I just wanted through satire and strange elements in the film that people start questioning, and hopefully have a healthy debate about it, and not judging it, but just like, being aware, because all these things are done without any of us having any say in it, but like 10 people in the Silicon Valley deciding for the rest of humanity. And a lot of people are going to lose their jobs, while a lot of other people few people are going to get very rich from it. And this feels a little bit, it needs to be addressed ethically, I think.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And, the film is very thought-provoking, but then there are lighter moments, as you said, with comedy. And I think when they go to the clinic, and obviously Chiwetel's character, he learns that men are almost obsolete when it comes to the pregnancy process. And it's quite a funny moment. But then obviously from the other side, we see with Rachel, she's then later being judged for bringing her baby into work. So was it important for you to show that regardless of how things go, that it's maybe not beneficial either to men or to women to be in this world where this artificial process exists?
Yeah, I think, a lot of the ideas from the film actually came from real articles that I read about what American companies are doing to their female employees in the Silicon Valley, or even like bigger companies. And so one thing that was pretty shocking to me was like a lot of companies are offering their female employees $10,000 to freeze their eggs so they could have a child whenever they want, and they can remain competitive with their male colleagues. But I thought, is that really the feminist message, or is it just telling women, there's never a good time to have a child, just don't have it now, and then have it much later when you're really tired, and stay competitive with your male coworkers? But shouldn't, feminism be like, be the woman you want to be? If you want to have children now, we'll support you. If you want to have children later, we'll support you. If you don't want to have children and just focus on your career, we'll support you. But this felt a little bit hypocritical. I felt that a private company would tell their employees like about their reproductive system, and trying to like coerce them in a gentle way into, the message is, if you want to be competitive, don't have a child, basically. That I don't think that's a very feminist approach. And we've seen countries like Scandinavian countries that have longer maternity leaves and are really helping women to be the women they want to be. The ones that don't want to have children is fine, but the ones that want to have children, they're doing something very important for society. They should be supported. But in the US, it felt like there is a sort of commodification of birth, and it has to be productive, and it has to be fast, and that felt a bit science fiction to me. And we've seen it also in the abortion debate, which is very interesting. I mean, it's very commendable that a lot of companies stepped in because the government was backtracking on all the progress. But it's also very strange that a private company is going to say, okay, if you can't have your abortion here, we'll pay for your trip in another state. So they know a lot about your private life, which is public health. It should be like a government thing, and it's true because the government is not doing any more than the private company has to step in, but it doesn't seem like a very healthy environment either. So it's all those questions that I want to throw up in the air, and then everyone can decide, for themselves how they deal with them, and how, as a filmmaker, you're not making propaganda, you're not a politician, I don't have answers. I'm just interested to shake things a little bit and have the debate at least.
Yeah, for sure. And it must have been almost refreshing for you when you are dealing with these quite heavy topics and themes to have those moments of levity on set, as you said, with Chiwetel's character, where you can have some fun with the idea and add some comedy as well. That must have been quite refreshing for you.
Yeah, I love satire. I love Adam McKay, for instance. I thought he's very good at taking really hard subjects and making them enjoyable, because there's so much humor in it. Like, in Don't Look Up, it's such I know the film was criticized in America, but I felt from a European perspective, I thought it was very refreshing to have a film where you could see the thing coming and you're looking the other way, and the amount of denial there is in the US about climate change. And so it's a very healthy relationship, I think, to the audience, to be able to you can laugh about everything, everything is a subject of satire. And I think it's a much more efficient way to connect with people through laughter and how ridiculous and absurd the situation is, than just hammering people with a message, right? So that's what I was trying to do. Some people find the film terrifying. They don't find it funny at all. And other people find it very funny, which I think is great, because films, I think, should be a place where, as an audience, you can project your own anxieties and your own life. It shouldn't be like a one-way conversation. It should be an exchange. So I'm happy even when people hate the film for some reason, it means, and other people love it, it means something is happening. It doesn't leave them indifferent, right? So
yeah, well, that's great. And it's been great to see that. I'm sure you'll see a great response this weekend. And I'm curious, you have built this really compelling sci-fi world with the Pod Generation. So do you ever see yourself returning to that world to maybe tell more stories, or was this always maybe just a one-off project for you, and you've almost told the story that you set out to at this point?
yeah, I want to make a series actually about artificial intelligence. That would be the next step, because I love science fiction. I think it's a incredible genre to be able to talk about philosophy and politics in a very playful way. And I love building a world. So right now I'm on spec because no one is writing and working, but I'm starting to gather ideas to do a sort of series, a mini series about the future where artificial intelligence is controlling entirely our lives. And I also have a project on Edward Hopper, so it's like completely, it's completely unrelated. But it's always this thing, because Edward Hopper also had a big issue with consumerism. He was the first American painter to kind of show, the consequences of loneliness and consumerism. And his characters are very lonely and isolated, and he had a lot of things to say about where the American society was going in the 40s. So I think there's maybe a thread of like being fascinated by what American capitalism is doing to people. And there's an amazing series, I don't know if you've seen it, on the BBC, called The Century of the Self by Adam Curtis. And it's really the journey of PR and marketing and advertising in America from the 1930s to today. And it's fascinating to see how the country is really so incredibly skilled at marketing anything, from the education, but it's branding, like Juilliard or Columbia or Harvard or the Obamas or the Clintons, it's always branding, and they do it in a really interesting and smart way. But it's also what's making the country, I think, right now it's complicated, it's very polarized, and you can't just brand everything. Not everything is for sale. There are other values that are important to develop as a human being. So I think that's why there's so much turmoil right now. It's a complicated place. But this I can talk about for hours.
Oh yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And just one final question for you. It's great as a fan to see an original sci-fi story like this with so much to sink your teeth into as an audience member. But looking ahead, do big budget movies, whether it be Marvel, Star Wars, do those appeal to you at all as a filmmaker, or are you more interested in telling these more personal stories, like you said, like the AI series you hope to develop?
Yeah, no, Marvel I would never do, because politically, ethically and politically, I can't. Like, I feel if I'm building those little films that are actually a satire and a criticism of the commodification, I feel those, you know, those products have commodified cinema a lot. And if you see, like, if you compare like movie theaters in France, for instance, and in Europe, where you have an insane diversity of independent films, you could go see a Turkish film, an Israeli film, any kind of small film that came out at Cannes or in the theater. And in America now you have the blockbusters, and then you have very few spots for independent films. So they've crushed the industry in a way, and they've been very profitable, but they're also a machine, and they're very crushing, I think, for filmmakers that are trying to still making their little movies and say something about humanity. So I can't criticize it and do it, you know. It's like I have to be like, I can't, I have to be faithful to what I think. And I'm not saying they're bad and all this, but I don't think they help, you know, their entertainment in a way that has become a formula. And I think even the generation of teenagers today are getting tired of them. So
Yeah.
they're gonna have to renew and find other. But yeah, no, for me it doesn't attract me at all. I feel life is very short, and if I'm telling my teenager not to try to watch other type of movies, I can't be making them. So yeah, it's not my cup of tea. But I understand why they exist, but I just not my. It doesn't attract me at all.
Oh, well, for sure. Well, I think we're very fortunate to have filmmakers like yourself who are telling these stories and giving people an alternative. And I'm sure this weekend, the Pod Generation is going to be a big hit over in the States and across the world where it's opening. So, Sophie, thank you so much for the film and for taking the time. It's been lovely chatting with you.
Thank you so much.
It's great to meet
Bye.
you. Good luck with the movie.
Bye.